Aton or no Aton. Seeing how popular these are becoming, it made me wonder. This happened a while back in my early 20s. But Aton for asking my friends to stop taking money from my father. Growing up, my dad worked very hard to take care of me and my older brother. My mother and father split up when I was very young, but he held a good relationship with her and she helped out a little. He was our main caregiver. He worked a 9-to-5 job and did his best to provide for us, and I'm forever grateful. My grandfather passed away when I was in high school. This took a toll on all of us, but especially my father. I graduated high school when I was 17. I love my dad, but my upbringing was a little rough. Dad was always exhausted. My brother always beat me up or verbally tore me up. So when I did graduate, I was more than happy to move out of my childhood home as soon as I could, which I did. I moved into a friend's house with his rather large family because it was closer to work. And I enjoyed being there. At the time I thought my dad was taking it well, going out with friends and living his life. He would come and party with my friends and I after a while. My friends loved him and thought he was the coolest dad. He was a big fan of a local Christian rock station and was always looking for concerts to go to. I've been to a few with him and my buddies. My buddies loved going to these concerts with my dad and I, and sometimes just my dad. One night I decided not to go to the concert with them. Hours later they get back to the double I'm living in with James and another friend. James walks in with a worried look on his face and comes up to me and says, "Your dad hit his head in a mosh pit and found Jesus." My father walked in with a huge bump on his head and a different look in his eyes. He was very amped up for acquiring a lump of that size. I was scared he had a concussion or some sort of head trauma. He said he was fine and refused to get it checked out. He continued to hang out with my friends and I noticed he began to act like a high schooler. Which he's a grown man and I was fresh out of high school, so I didn't question too much. My buddy James was living in the double with me and another friend. He didn't have a job to pay his part of the rent. To make myself very clear here, I've been working since I was 16. It may not be healthy, but I've prided myself on paying my own way. Not asking my family for anything. Especially not money. James was my childhood friend. He grew up 2 doors down the street from me. He was also pretty close with my dad because he was around all the time growing up. After my dad's incident and when his actions became irrational and almost scary even, I asked James to stop taking money from him for rent. I told him I would cover it until he found a job. I was scared something was severely wrong with my father's mental state. He lost his job and started spending all his money like it was going out of style. I was afraid that he wouldn't be able to take care of himself. The next day my father shows up at my place with James. James then hands me rent and I was furious. I asked him and told me yes, and he still asked my dad to pay his rent. I waited for my father to leave and I exploded. I told James to get out of my house. If you can blatantly disrespect my request and lie to my face, I don't want you here. This made my father angry. He showed up at 8 a.m. the next day threatening to sue me for James' belongings, which I had no problem returning. Turns out when my father hit his head, it opened the floodgates for a bipolar mental breakdown. He was extremely manic for a very long time. After kicking James out, my father, James, and Brett hung out more without me. I wouldn't have minded if my father would have found another job or some sort of financial support, but I was getting scared and I asked my family to help. My grandma was reluctant, but she flew out and we decided to take him to Netcare. The unfortunate timing of these events lined up with my birthday. I took my father to Netcare a day before my 19th birthday. My family was supportive and assured me this is how we should have handled this. My buddies, Brett and James, got a hold of me and informed me I was an awful person and ungrateful child for doing this to my father. The next day, my birthday, I didn't want to celebrate. My family said since my grandma flew out, we should make a dinner anyways and try to celebrate my day. We made a small dinner. All the while my father is now being diagnosed and treated in an institution and I felt so terrible. My buddies told me how bad a person I was for doing this and it broke my heart. My family assured me that the boys were just using me and my dad and that none of this is all right and we're doing what's in my father's best interest. I am the black sheep of my family. I'm a failure and I can't help but blame my parents' divorce of 10 years ago. I know it's a lot to take in from the title, but that's the best way I can summarize how I'm feeling. Also, I'm sorry if this is all over the place. I'm just not a very good writer. I've always been the difficult one of my family. My parents like to say my terrible twos lasted until I was 12 and that I mellowed with puberty. But I've got learning disabilities and possibly ADHD, and I got given an immense amount of support from school for these and it helped. I felt like I was on the right track. Until Christmas of 10th grade, when my parents told me they were getting divorced. I was blindsided, but they said that it wouldn't change how the fact that they would be there for me and my siblings. And that they'd planned to be getting divorced for a year before they told us. They just wanted to make sure it didn't distract from my elder brother's exams. By the time they'd told us this, my mother bought a second car, lied about why we needed it, lied about why my dad had been sleeping downstairs, and had told the rest of my extended family and expected them to lie to us about it. And then wanted to spend the rest of that Christmas acting like we were a happy family. Only for Dad to just up and leave to his new apartment right after New Year's. Now, as you can imagine, this fucked 16-year-old me up, as then I was deciding what courses to take, and as my parents worked at the school I went to. And even though I loved the courses my parents taught, I decided I wanted nothing to do with them, so I did courses that they knew nothing about. Big fucking mistake. I then spent the next 2 years having to quash rumors at school about my parents' divorce. nearly getting into fights with people who were calling my dad a cheater and every teacher at the school treating me like I was damaged goods. On top of this, my parents decided that, hey, you remember how we said we were going to not change the way we parent you? Yeah, no, we're going to stick you, our obviously traumatized child, in the middle of our arguments. So I learned everything that was wrong with my dad from my mother, while my dad just completely refused to even mention my mother in conversation and didn't take the blame for anything. They literally couldn't be in the same room as each other. My mom used to drop us off at school, grab a coffee and leave just as my dad got in. I heard years later from one of their colleagues that meetings about me and my sibling had to be done independently of each other as they'd just fight. They'd then lie and say, "Oh, everything's good between us, don't you worry." I spent a year and a half like this until the beginning of my final year in school, when after another bout of my mother's alcohol-induced blame dad monologue, I snapped. I yelled, cursed out my mother, telling her off for lying about them being separated for months before they told us. Shielding my elder brother but seemingly not caring about how I'm going to react to it. For putting me in the middle of their arguments, for attempting to make me pick a side when all I wanted was to be fucking loved and cared for by them. And all the while just ignoring my younger sibling who so clearly had been excusing himself to his room cause he couldn't handle being near them. To be honest, that's all I can really remember, as I immediately stormed out of the house and went to a friend's house for a small party. While I was there, I received 2 phone calls, one from my elder brother from the other side of the planet who said, "How dare you talk to Mom like that?" to which I immediately ended the call. And from my dad who just said, "This isn't my fault," and I ended that call as well as soon as he said that. Now I don't remember the fallout from this. All I know is that my parents did make an effort to not shit-talk each other to me, which was barely passable. I just wanted to leave to the UK for uni. And I did. Then I dropped out because I hadn't built any form of independent studying ability. I hated the course I had selected, and I fell into a deep depression. At one point I had set a date to off myself only to be rescued by my elder brother and my cousin. So I left, and then COVID hit and both my parents came back to the UK, bought houses and tried to be there for me and my brothers. And my brothers were okay with it, but I just couldn't sit right with it. I hated my parents for what they did to me, but I can't say anything about it to anyone because it doesn't make sense to anyone who knows them. My mother helped me get a job at her new school. My dad has spent thousands on getting me back to where I grew up to see my friends every few years. They're both immensely respected in their careers. Heck, I couldn't even fucking talk to my school counselors about it because they were family friends of my parents. I've now since went back to a smaller uni to do a course I actually liked. But I dropped out again earlier this year because I felt like I was just not smart enough or had the work ethic to complete the work. Causing another mental health dive, and I just can't take it anymore. I am now 25 with basically no work experience, no savings, no degree, no job, and habitual addiction to weed. Stuck in my mother's house while she works in another country. My dad is still where we used to live with a whole new family to support. My elder brother has fucked off the Australia and my younger brother is on the other side of the country to me. I've got no fucking support system apart from my therapist who's fucking useless, but I'm too much a people pleaser to tell him. Every member of my family only ever seems to care about me on the surface or when it suits them. I'm just a failure. I'm the only one of my family to drop out of uni, let alone twice. All my cousins have degrees and are working great jobs. I just a failure. I've got nothing to show for my 25 years of living. I went to a fucking elite private school for goddamn free because of my parents' work. I should worship the ground they walk for what they've given me, but I loathe them, but they're the only people I want to talk to about how I feel. I'm just so frustrated at myself. I'm frustrated at my life. I'm frustrated that I'm the only one in my family that's like this. And I just keep coming back to that day in 2014 when my parents sat me and my brothers down and told us they were getting a divorce. It's like everything that's wrong with me can be linked back to that moment. Sorry if this is all unintelligible gibberish. I'm exhausted and frankly, I don't give a shit if my grammar, syntax, sentence structure isn't 100%. First truly safe relation left me for another. How do I recover? TLDR. Met my first truly safe relation and I ruined it by asking to take it slow by going back to being friends. After us agreeing to try again, she met someone else. Now I am left broken and depressed. Without a core self or belief things will get any better. Feeling abandoned and replaced. How do I recover from this? I recently got diagnosed with CPTSD, and recently started working on past traumas and how to feel emotions when they aren't extremely intense. Mid-January I met an amazing woman randomly at my university. She took initiative to start talking and soon after we ended up as a couple. It was amazing. Intense and overwhelming but amazing. I finally met a person who I felt safe with, and for the first time I allowed myself to enjoy being intimate, cuddling, and it not just being about sex. For the first time in my life I made love with another person. I felt emotions I didn't know I could feel, and it seemed like she felt the exact same way. She validated me and gave me the confirmations that I have been longing for most of my life. That I was enough. Enough for her and as a person. Our communication was open and honest. And I told her everything I struggled with and she did the same. As I said, it was really intense. After 2 weeks I knew everything about her and she knew everything about me. We texted, hung out and spent time together almost constantly. After about 3 months I started having doubts about the relationship itself as the intensity died down. Insecurities about her feelings for me and the feeling of something being wrong in our relation. The feeling grew and I started being very hypervigilant and analyzing when we spent time together and when we texted. She promised me that nothing was wrong and that she still cared for me and wanted me. The feeling of doubt grew too big for me, and after discussing it multiple times with my therapist, my ex and I agreed to take a break and spend time together as friends. Everything was different after that. Like some invisible was had appeared between us which prevented us from saying what we truly wanted to say. Like we were in some kind of limbo. My overthinking went crazy and I started to analyze texts and her behavior. The open communication was still there. After being in this weird limbo until mid-August, the first had had enough of the doubt. Feelings of wanting to be closer to her again emerged and I proposed that we could try again. Not as a couple at first, but instead try to reignite the passion that was in the beginning. She agreed and it felt like a weight came off my shoulders. Of September she called me and told me that she and I was done romantically. She had met someone who had given her butterflies in her stomach, and that was an indication that she no longer saw any potential with us being a couple. She still wanted to be friends. My world collapsed and spiraled into a depression. After she hung up, I disassociated and broke my hand, smashing it into a table. I pretty much stopped eating. Seeing her at campus triggered anxiety attacks. And I broke down multiple times a day. Late September I got admitted to a psychiatric ward where I stayed until Tuesday this week. I constantly think of her and the new guy. Of all the things we had planned to do. Of all the thing I got from her, that she is giving to him now. How my decision to be friends ruined everything. How everything is my fault. I had some friends who chose to withdraw and now I am all alone. My overthinking and analyzing going crazy. I can't seem to get grounded or be present. Even when with people I disassociate my body and talking being on autopilot, my mind racing with thoughts. The stay at the ward didn't help, and talking with my therapist doesn't seem to help either. I got started on vortioxetine, but that won't truly kick in for another 3 weeks. I had some very dark thoughts and feel like my entire being, person and will disappeared. Like my core self is gone and nothing but a gaping hole is left in its place. I don't want to die, but I see purpose in my life now. I feel so alone now that she isn't here. I can't text or call her. Something I used to do all the time. I feel abandoned and replaced. How do I possibly recover from this when strategies, medicine, therapy and other things doesn't seem to make any difference? I feel like there is no hope of things getting better.